realizes he never told the girls what happened to him before they met, so he explains the story and adds that he only realized he could do this recently. After hearing the story, the girls can't believe how awful his party was and rain down curses, while Sakura says she'd have cut the little twerp down if it were her. That aside, Luke admits that the reason why he wanted to keep being an adventurer was longing. When he was a kid, a party of adventurers would come through his village, and hearing their fantastic adventures put a seed of longing inside of him. Even though they were probably capping for most of them, he couldn't shake that feeling of longing. His parents treated him like he said he wanted to quit law school to become a rapper, and it was so bad that he ended up leaving his village because of it. That's why he kept going even though he was a worthless E-ranker with almost no point in being alive. Sakura looks at him worried that she might end up a loser like him and asks if he regrets it, but Luke says he doesn't regret it 1 second because he truly enjoyed being at the bottom of the food chain. However, his last quest was a rude wake-up call from the universe to get a fresh start. Then again, he can thank that quest for his new abilities, and now he can live a quiet life as a weapon seller. Upon hearing this, they all determine to work hard and get the shop ready. Sometime later, Luke looks through his list of things to be done when he hears a man call out to him. It turns out to be a man who looks like he ate Harry Potter, who says he knows Sylvia's family very well and heard that Luke saved her from the dragon. He then offers Luke a box of treats on the house, so Luke asks if he's sure he doesn't want anything in exchange for it. The man assures him it's a treat, and says a lot of his customers are really looking forward to his shop, wishing him good luck. Luke goes red when he realizes no one ever expected much or gave him anything before. He enjoys the feeling along with a taste of the treat. Meanwhile, Sakura runs into some kids who want her to show how she plays with long swords every day. Sakura doesn't think it's appropriate, but figures doing it once more time wouldn't hurt anyone. At this, she tosses a plank in the air, pulls out her sword from its sheath, and slices through the wood like a hot knife through butter. The kids stare up in disbelief, but their minds aren't the only minds blown, as Luke is also amazed that she was able to perform 2 slashes in an instant, which needs both speed and technique. He figures she really is a skilled swordsman as he suspected. Sakura brags that that was a piece of cake, but Luke wonders what happened to the woman who said swords shouldn't be played with in public. When Sakura turns back and spots him, all pride in herself flees her body. She rushes over to ask Luke how long he'd been standing there, so Luke informs her he heard the whole comment about swords. Sakura goes red as she explains that displaying their skills in her home is a no-no, so receiving praise is very rare for her. Luke understands and hands her some of the treats he got for free from the stall. Sakura thanks him and begins munching away at the treats, which she realizes are so good. Luke teases that she really likes eating, so she laments always getting humiliated ever since she met him. Luke says it's important to let go at times, so Sakura thanks him for saying so, as she grew up in a very strict family and tends to let go way too much when she's in places like this. At this, Luke asks if she's planning to stay in the area since she's a warrior in training, but Sakura says she's returning home for a short visit and will be leaving tomorrow. She explains that she wants to make this town her home base, but to do that she needs to collect something she left back at home. When Luke asks more about it, she says it's a special material she wants him to make her katana with. Luke realizes he'll be making her sword only after she returns, so he promises to surprise her with the most amazing shop she's ever seen when she comes back. In response, Sakura smiles and says she'll be looking forward to it. Days later, a handyman calls out to Luke and asks where he wants his sign put up. Luke calls back to him and confirms where he wants it while Sakura stands nearby. After this, posters go up across town to announce the opening of the weapon shop. Sylvia asks if he named his shop after his birthplace, White Wolfwood, so Luke admits that he couldn't think of anything better. He then thanks Sylvia for all her help, like making sure his eyes never get tired of staring at her chest. Sylvia assures him that it's fine since he did save her life after all. But now, she points out so many people are waiting excitedly for him to open. Luke smiles to himself and agrees that this is where it all starts. Finally, the handyman looks down from the roof and informs Luke that the sign is all set. Now, with the last of the preparations complete, he and Sylvia stand in front of the shop and welcome everyone to the grand opening of White Wolf Arms. Some weeks later, Luke realizes that even though it hasn't been long since he opened his shop, he gets lots of business and has gotten used to dealing with customers. Just then, a man asks if Luke has a sword that can fit his budget of almost nothing, and sure enough, Luke points him in the direction of several swords made for the monetarily challenged. Later, Luke finishes attending to them when a bottle of wine lands on the table as Sylvia walks in, not surprised to find it busy as usual. She then explains that the bottle is a present from Merida, as everyone is overjoyed from growing more powerful thanks to the materials harvested from the dragon's corpse. Luke is surprised to learn that's what it's for, though she adds that it's also a belated shop-warming gift. Sylvia spots the swords on the wall and sees he hasn't sold any of his featured replicas yet. She figures that they aren't exactly priced to sell quickly, and the average guild member couldn't afford one. She then points out that these are only replicas and asks if he could charge even more for the original ones, to which Luke assures her he can. He says he can probably charge several gold coins for it, as he pictures the cash raining down. Sylvia insists that it's as much as average folks make in a year, but Luke explains that he can't make another one so easily. He would have to go back to the A rank dungeon of hell, which means going with an A rank hero, so for now, it's basically impossible. Sadly, he can't collect more of the material, and he's not in a hurry to sell it. Plus, he figures there aren't any adventurers with that kind of cash to drop on a sword. Just then, the door swings open, and two men walk in, one blonde and the other with dark hair. The blonde one asks to confirm if Luke is the owner of the store, while the other man asks if this is the shop with the famous Dragon Slayer sword. When Luke confirms that it is, the blonde asks if the sword is available so he can buy it. Luke points them to the swords on the wall and says similar replicas are available, but the blonde insists those are just poor quality replicas, but he wants the real deal. However, Luke informs them that he hasn't put the original blade up for sale. The blonde explains that he has reasons for wanting the blade and asks his colleague to show him the money. The large oaf then pulls out 5 gold coins, causing all the other customers in the store to marvel like money is the 8th wonder of their world. Even Luke begins to sweat as he stares at them and wonders who on earth the man is to offer 5 gold coins so casually. When the man worries that the 5 coins aren't enough, he motions to his colleague again, so he drops 5 additional coins and asks what he thinks of this offer. Moments later, the door slams shut as the men exit the shop, leaving Luke and Sylvia exhausted by the tense negotiations. Sylvia counts the gold coins again to make sure she's not dreaming, then asks how 2 adventurers could afford this. Luke says no adventurer could shell out that kind of money, but they might have been knights or noble envoys. He then points out that the blonde seemed to be a real connoisseur since he saw right through the quality of the replica swords. They agree that he couldn't be an ordinary person, but wonder why such a person would come to their town when the door suddenly opens. Just then, Sakura walks in and says it's been a while, so Sylvia runs to her and says she was getting tired of waiting since it felt like forever. On the other hand, Luke felt she was back earlier than expected, so Sakura says she really wanted to show him the material, which is why she came straight here. Luke suggests they take a look at it once they're done eating, so they all take a break for lunch. Once the food is served, Sakura starts stuffing her mouth and praising Sylvia's cooking as the best she's ever tasted. They even catch up on other news as Sylvia reveals that Luke's been hired to restore some of the buildings in town too. Sakura says the shop is even better than she imagined, and when she points out that he's getting a lot of customers, Luke adds that some aren't even adventurers. This is all because he fixed the condemned life hazard of a building, which is his biggest advertisement. Sakura praises Luke for doing well for himself, and assures him he'll make his starter fees back in no time, but Luke shyly says he's already earned most of it back. Sylvia asks if she remembers the sword Sakura used to defeat the dragon, and explains that it had just sold for 10 gold coins. However, they all wonder who on earth those men were and figure rich people must just want tools that come with lots of prestige. Sakura's eyes glaze over as she insists she'd be set for life with that amount, but they tell her she's just exaggerating. However, they can never know the truth behind it, so they decide to focus on Sakura's blade instead. Sakura places a special jewel on the table and says this is the material she wants for her sword, which they call Hihai Irikane. Luke says he's never heard of it, while Sylvia points out how it is red like a gemstone, even though it's actually a metal. Sakura then reveals that one of the goals of her journey was to find someone who could forge a sword out of the material, as no one in her village, or even in the East, knew how to make any new tools from it. Luke asks if she's sure she wants to entrust him with such a precious metal, so she says there's no one she'd rather entrust it to. However, Luke explains that the process is complex and will take a bit of time, which Sakura is surprised to hear from the goat of sword making. However, Luke explains that the skill he has is repair, so he can't just make a sword out of the material right away. Sakura realizes he can't create a blade from the metal ore alone, but Luke says it's not impossible. He could recompose half of the ore bit by bit into an existing katana until it learns the shape. Then he can decompose the katana along with the rest of the ore and recompose it all. If he does that, he'll be able to make a 100% Hihai Irikane blade, which is sort of a cheat workaround. Sakura gets excited when she hears this and asks if it'll really be possible, so Luke explains that the theory is sound, but he's never actually tried it, causing Sakura to ask him to do it as soon as he can. She hands him her katana and asks him to make a 50% version of the Hihai Irikane katana first, and then after, make a 100% version. Luke assures her that if that's what she wants, he'd better not fall short of her expectations. He gets to work on first making a 50-50 split of the Hihai Irikane and the katana. As the girls watch, they're amazed by the technique along with the pretty colors. As they stare at the sword, the girls comment that it has a pink color, so Luke explains that combining the ore with regular metal makes it lighter. Sakura asks Luke if he minds her taking it outside and giving it a try, so Luke tells her to knock herself out as long as she doesn't stab his other customers. When she leaves, Luke laughs at how much of a big kid at heart Sakura is, so Sylvia teases him for sounding like a dad. Outside, Sakura lights her finger on fire, but explains that it's only a low-level skill, so she can't use it for a direct attack, but they say that items made with Hihai Irikane conduct fire and amplify its intensity. With this, she sets the blade on fire and plans to see if the process works by testing it on something. Luke suggests a block of wood and tosses it in the air, warning her to watch out for the shop window, so Sakura swings her sword, which creates a wave of fire that burns through the area she slashes. The other customers outside narrowly escape meeting Gojo in heaven as they stare at the scorch marks in the ground. Sakura then tells Luke that her sword is incredible, while the other adventurers consider giving up on their adventure dreams thanks to her. Luke and Sylvia stare at her speechlessly as Sylvia wonders if Sakura really thinks that's a low-level skill. However, Luke sweats and realizes that he might have just made the most overpowered weapon since Death Note. He then stared at the area of impact and wondered just how strong it would become if Sakura used a higher level of fire on it. Luke can't imagine he was actually capable of making something like this, because not long ago he was E-rank cannon fodder who was happy to join a hero's team as a pack mule only to be tossed away like you're cooking. As he stares at his hands, he realizes how unreal it feels for someone like him to make such a weapon. Sylvia praises Luke and says it's just what she expected from him, pointing out how thrilled Sakura is. Sakura then asks Luke to make her a short sword next time so she can dual wield with her katana. Luke also never thought that he'd like friends who appreciate his skills like this, so this motivates him to work even harder and tells Sakura to leave it to him. Later, a customer thanks Luke for his help and promises to come back if his sword breaks again, so Luke assures him he'll be waiting for his business. When he's done work, he heads out for a break, but he continues to burn with creative energy as he can't wait to return and fix more weapons. He remembers that Sakura said she wanted a short sword, so he plans to make it now and surprise her with it, while also adjusting the ore ratio. Just then, some men in armor approach him and ask if he's Luke of White Wolf Wood and if they could have a moment of his time. The short man named Garnet explains that they are the Order of the Silver Wings, but Luke's never heard of them. He then asks what they need and informs them that he usually handles repairs or requests at the shop. However, Garnet demands to know how long Luke intends to play dumb, as the evidence against him continues to mount up. Luke stares blankly for a second and turns around suspiciously to say he has no idea what they're talking about. Garnet then grabs Luke by his shirt, angrily telling him not to underestimate him. However, the bigger knight named Felix stops him and tells him not to interrogate him, or the truth will get twisted easily, but Garnet tells him to shut up. Felix then reminds him that he's the commanding officer and threatens to report the shrimp to their lord for disobeying orders. The shrimp demands they leave his brother out of it, while Felix apologizes to Luke for the rough greeting. At this, Felix removes his helmet and officially introduces himself as the vice commander of the order, asking if Felix can go with them to discuss a matter of great importance. Luke pauses and asks what would happen if he refuses to go with them, so Felix says that since that would be an obstruction, they'd have to do something worse than yanking his shirt. Luke gets the message and suggests they head to the shop since they stick out like sore thumbs in the street. But that's just when Sylvia notices them. She quickly walks up to Luke and asks what's going on, so Luke says he has no idea and is about to find out, but it doesn't seem good. However, Luke tells her not to worry since they're only going inside to talk, though Sylvia worries how she can possibly not worry with scary knights in front of her. Sylvia demands to go with him and asks the knights if they mind, but before she even gets a response, she rushes off to tell her mother first. Luke asks if it's really okay for a kid to tag along, so Felix says it's fine as she gives consent to be his official witness. Later, the group discusses inside and Felix asks Luke to describe each member of the hero's Falcon party that was inside the dungeon with him. Luke starts off with Falcon, the loudmouth overconfident scum who would make mistakes out of pride and then use his skills to try and fix it. Then there was Julia, who was Falcon's childhood friend and lover and would even donate any number of brain cells he asked of her. The only time she stood up to him was when it concerned other women. Next was the white mage, Blanc, who was the evil witch who proposed they abandon Luke and always rubbed people the wrong way. As for the last member, Noir, Luke says he didn't know what to say. The girl had so little presence that he honestly couldn't describe what she was like. Luke asks why they want to know about them, so Felix says they might as well get on with it. He explains that Falcon and his party are currently missing in action, and the Order of the Silver Wings is investigating their whereabouts. Luke says he hasn't heard anything about that, and simply told the guild they were probably still in the dungeon, but he gets the shock of his life when he hears he's being suspected of foul play because he left the dungeon without his team. Apparently, the ministers sponsoring Falcon claimed that there is no doubt that the hero Falcon died due to betrayal by Luke, and the best course of action was to interrogate Luke for details. Sylvia interrupts and demands that it's an absurd accusation since Luke isn't that kind of person. However, Felix tells Sylvia to calm herself as he understands her feelings, but should be allowed to finish. Felix continues by saying the ministers believe Luke stole Falcon's weapon, so they were appointed to retrieve the Dragon Slayer sword. At this, Luke looks at one of the men and recognizes him as the same man from the day he sold the sword, Bradford. He now understands why they had so much money, because it was a political assignment. Felix says the minister's reasoning was proved false. However, the sword Luke made contained mithril. Sylvia asks what mithril is, so Luke explains that it's a precious metal with a terrifyingly high magic affinity. One would need permission from the royal palace to gather it, let alone sell it. Sylvia then listens in shock as Luke reveals that the worst-case scenario for not doing so is the death penalty. Silver reminds Luke that he repaired the sword with the walls of the dungeon, so Luke says the cave must have been composed of mithril, but he couldn't analyze it because he'd never seen that metal before. Felix points out that since his production of a mithril sword was not intentional, he can't actually be charged. Luke then takes a hard gulp as Felix informs him that if he really made the sword from the dungeon walls, no one could have known there was mithril there. However, to prove his innocence, Luke must disintegrate a part of the dungeon wall with them as witnesses, so Luke agrees to do it to clear up any suspicions. Luke asks how they could possibly think he betrayed his party, but Felix assures him that only the ministers think that because, in terms of ability alone, it would be pretty impossible for an E rank to betray an A rank hero. Luke then points out that the shrimp outside Shore seemed to believe he was guilty, so Felix explains that Garnet hates people who sell mithril illegally, which is probably what he thought of Luke. The next day, the knights plan to escort Luke to the dungeon to gather rocks from the walls. When Garnet spots him, he playfully calls out to Luke and tells him he's counting on him, but the total attitude change weirds Luke out as he wonders if the Short King is bipolar. As the men shake on it, Luke continues to feel something's off when Garnet suddenly squeezes his hand. Luke gets free of the little rat's grip while Garnet insists that they'll finally bust his lies open. Suddenly, Garnet sees someone and tells them outsiders need to back off, but it turns out to be Sakura, and she insists that she's not an outsider since Felix gives her permission to accompany them. Luke tells Sakura he's fine and apologizes for making her act like both a bodyguard and a tour guide, but Sakura assures him she's always glad to help out, while Garnet scoffs at how typical E-rankers always need someone to protect them. Felix interrupts and reminds Garnet that they've spoken about this, and if Garnet steps out of line, Felix will report him to their lord. Garnet quickly agrees and promises to be serious from now on, while Luke taunts him for finally listening to his big brother. Garnet wonders how Luke knows about his brother, so Luke reminds him of their first conversation where Garnet referred to his brother. Suddenly, Bradford, the oaf from earlier, informs them that the vice commander is ready to set off, so Luke apologizes for goofing off, while he wonders who spat in his morning coffee. Later, they arrive at the Sundial Forest with the dragon's remains, so Garnet says that adventurers who go there in light armor are either courageous or plain stupid. Luke asks if he's wearing full armor because he's scared of whittle overgrown lizards, so Garnet gets upset and screams at Luke to deny the accusations. However, Luke doubles down and tells him not to worry since there haven't been any reports of another dragon, further infuriating Garnet, who insists he's not scared. As Felix, Sakura, and the oaf watch them bicker in frustration, they realize they almost look like they could be friends. After they arrive at the entrance to the A-rank dungeon entrance, they wonder what it's doing in a place like that. As they head down the stairs, they're surprised to see it really links to the other dungeon and plan to investigate the lower level dungeon too. The men inspect the walls Luke says he used for the repair and agree that it does appear to be merely stone at first glance. Garnet insists that if the walls are part of the dungeon, then the walls should be virtually indestructible, so Felix tells him to give it a go and Garnet happily agrees, warning Luke that if he knocks down the wall, then Luke is indeed a fraud. Luke tells him he's well aware and encourages him to do his best, so Garnet charges forward at the wall and activates his skill, which allows him to deliver a powerful kick with his leg. However, the dungeon wall remains intact, as if to mock the Short King for having the impact of a fly. Afterward, Felix asks what Garnet thinks, so Garnet admits that its similarity to rock is superficial, when it's really a cluster of metal that even a hero couldn't break. After hearing this, Felix tells Luke to go ahead, so Luke agrees and bends down to get started. As he begins to activate his skill, he realizes coming back here takes him back to the worst moment in his life, so he plans to decompose a small part of the wall so they can all go home. After placing his hands on the wall, the cracks form around a circular portion like the last time, and even Felix is astounded that Luke broke the wall so easily. Next, Luke grabbed a sword and demonstrated how he recomposed his sword with the rubble, which is how he made the sword that slayed the dragon. In other words, he had no idea it was mithril. Felix tells Bradford to collect some of the rubble, which he agrees to, but Luke is annoyed to hear Felix suggest that he dismantle more of the wall at different points. Luke would really rather not go any deeper into the dungeon, but Felix explains that can't be sure of the composition of every wall. Garnet begins to tease Luke for being scared, so Luke threatens to abandon him to the same fate as him. A while later, they collect a bag full of samples, which Felix says will be enough, while Luke is finally glad to be out of the dungeon. Garnet asks Luke how he managed to survive in such a depressing cave for 2 weeks, so Luke irritably reminds him he wasn't down there for fun. Felix tells Luke they'll take the medal for appraisal, and though the tests might take some time, they'll contact Luke as soon as they hear anything. As they're about to leave, Sakura calls for Luke and suggests he take some of the dragon's remains back with him, which would act as a nice souvenir for the other knights. However, Garnet continues to walk off as he tells them to do what they like while he heads home. Luke asks if he remembers the way back, but Garnet tells him to stop bothering him by being annoying. However, before he can finish his sentence, a giant claw comes out of nowhere and slams right into Garnet. At that moment, Luke feels the blood splatter on his face and watches in horror as Garnet's helmet flies off his head and lands next to him. There a clearly pissed off dragon roars at the top of its voice, while 2 more dragons fly right behind it. As for Garnet, he lies motionless and face down on the floor as his blood pools around his body. At that moment, Felix tells everyone to run for it, so the other adventurers in the area begin screaming for help, insisting they don't stand a chance against the dragons. Felix quickly calls out to Bradford, who answers immediately and activates his skill. Suddenly, chains of binding appear from his hands and wrap around the bodies of the dragons as they growl and struggle to get free. Unable to free themselves, the monsters tumble to the ground at Bradford's feet, and Luke is surprised at how many he was able to take down with just 1 skill. Just then, Sakura dashes out of nowhere and lands on one of the dragons, ready to draw her sword. Before the dragon can even react, Sakura unsheaths her sword cuts through its neck like a thin sheet of paper and goes on to defeat the rest of the dragons with one slice each.